For our big SceneKit project, we're now going to develop our own version of the popular Crossy Road game that you're probably familiar with. This will teach us how three-dimensional games work, and it will teach us the basics of SceneKit. Obviously, we start by creating a new Xcode project. For the template, we're going to select Game, and the technology is going to be SceneKit. The language will remain in Swift, obviously. I will now have to specify a name for the project. I'm going to go with Crazy Road. I will then, as always, select where I want to save the project and create it. We now have a project containing the SceneKit template. And to be able to start off from scratch, we'll begin by deleting a bunch of boilerplate stuff that we don't really need for this game. Let's start by expanding the art.sceneassets folder in the project navigator. So delete its entire content, meaning the ship.scene and texture.png files. The folder itself will stay because we will use it later on to include our own models and textures in the application. I will then open the GameViewController.swift file, where I will delete all the content of the viewDidLoad method, except for the super.viewDidLoad call. I can then delete all the other methods from this class entirely to now have a completely empty ViewController class, in which we can start implementing our own code. Since we've now also deleted the parts that set the settings for orientation and status bar, we'll now take care of these settings in the project settings. So let's select our project, and then in the General tab, I want to make sure our app always runs in portrait mode. So uncheck landscape left and right under device orientation. I will also make sure hide status bar and requires full screen are checked. And then I will switch over to our info.plist file, where I will add the entry ViewController based status bar appearance and set it to the value of no. So this way our status bar is really hidden throughout the game. We now have an empty SceneKit template and can begin developing our game. We'll start in our GameViewController class because, contrary to the SpriteKit framework, we will in SceneKit usually implement all of our game logic in the ViewController file itself and not create a dedicated scene file. First, I will now initialize a scene view and a scene in my ViewController class so that we have a scene that is presented on screen and that we can use to add all of our game elements to. Therefore, I will add two new properties to my class. The first will be called scene, and it will be a variable of type SCN_scene. And we will add an exclamation mark here to force unwrap its value. The other will be a variable called sceneView as SCNView, equally force unwrapped with the exclamation mark. I will force unwrap these two properties as an exception because they are required for our scene itself. So they will always have a value. Force unwrapping them like this will save us the hassle of always having to check for a valid value here. I want to initialize my two new properties in a new method right below viewDidLoad, which I will call setupScene. Inside of the setupScene method, I want to start by initializing our scene view, which we will set to the view of the GameViewController class itself by writing sceneView is equal to view as SCNView. I also added an exclamation mark for the ascast here, since if I take a quick look at the main.storyboard file, we can see that the view of this ViewController actually is a SceneKit view. So it's safe for us to assume this. I can then initialize my scene by setting scene to a new SCN scene instance without any parameters. So to just create an empty scene. Finally, we'll have to set this scene as the scene for our scene view property by writing scene view.scene and setting it to our newly initialized scene property. This initializes both our scene and scene view properties. And if I now, in the viewDidLoad method, add the calls to set up scene, this should work. And we should get an empty scene in our app, which we can then start adding elements to. So let's run the app to see if everything succeeds. And we don't get any errors. For this, we can use the simulator since we just want to check if everything compiles and starts properly. Later on, when we actually need to test our game functionality, we'll probably be better off with a real device that is able to deliver proper frame rates and such. Our app compiled and started fine. So we just see a black screen as of now, but that's because we didn't add anything to our scene just yet. We didn't get any errors or warnings though, so we can now begin working on our game together.